Story 1. A 15-year-old girl was returning home from a birthday party late at night. According to her friends, she fell from a bridge, but neither could tell a consistent story. And in the years since, many independent witnesses would report seeing her in foreign countries. I did a lot of research for this case as well. The first time in a while where I literally read every single article and news site published about the case. I also haven't posted to this sub in a while, and my last write-up was poorly written and borderline incomprehensible in some parts. I hope I did better this time. Barbara Vitez was born on August 13, 2001, in Senta, Serbia, to Hungarian parents, not surprisingly given Senta's proximity to the Hungarian border. She was described as a good kid, not problematic at all, didn't fall into what anyone would call the wrong crowd, and abstained from drugs and alcohol. She had an older brother and a group of friends. By age 15, she was studying at the School of Economics and Trade, having enrolled in September 2016. She never missed a single lesson or class. On November 25, 2016, two 17-year-old boys went into the police station to report an accident. They, together with a now 15-year-old Barbara, were returning home from a pizzeria which recently hosted the birthday party of a mutual friend. Their route took them over a railroad bridge spanning the Tisza River and connecting the towns of Senta and Koka. Barbara had tried passing in front of one of them and had to climb over the bridge railing to do so when she slipped and fell 10 meters into the water. While they were filing this report to the police, her parents were already worried since Barbara was late arriving home, and when they tried to call her, she wouldn't pick up. Before they could go and report her missing themselves, the police came and told them that something had likely happened to Barbara. They told the story that the boys told. Already they thought that was odd. Barbara had a crippling fear of heights, so much so that she wouldn't even go in the attic, and instead have others retrieve what she needed for her. The thought of climbing a ladder scared her that much so, climbing up the railing of a bridge, over a cold river in the middle of the night, seemed very out of character. Whether she fell by accident or was pushed, one thing remained the same. She likely fell into the river. Rescue teams spent the first 3 days searching the river, but any chances for her survival after the fall into the river, with a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius, was slim. On November 29th, the local police received assistance from the Gendarmerie's diving unit. They searched the riverbed in case her body had somehow sunk, but no trace of her was found there either. Nothing was found on the shore either. The police also employed sonar to scour the river, but the sonar failed to pick up on anything. By November 30th, the police knew her body had drifted far from the bridge, and so all the fishermen in the nearby towns and villages were told to be on high alert, especially because her body would have likely bloated and floated to the surface by now. On December 1st, after her body failed to surface, the search was expanded to the Novobech Dam, and they combed an additional 50 kilometers of the waterway and riverbank from Senta to Novi Bečej. An additional number of anglers and fishermen were also employed to help search even more of the waterway. By December 12th, the police finally acted on her parents' suspicions. As mentioned, the boys told different stories about how exactly she fell. Some said she slipped from a railing, and others said she climbed up a ladder on the bridge to show off. Based on the bridge's design, she likely would have landed on the bridge's concrete supports. Whether there were 2, 3, or 4 boys was itself in dispute. The two were subjected to a polygraph test with a Serbian interpreter. That meant the test was conducted in a language the investigators didn't speak, since they'd give their answers in Hungarian and have it translated to the police in Serbian. They passed the test. After her disappearance, they deleted her from their friends list on social media. On December 13th, whilst anxiously waiting for news on their daughter, her parents still had to check their mail. When they opened the mailbox, they saw that somebody had left a letter without an envelope or signature. The letter was from a so-called well-wisher who described what happened. They alleged that a third boy was present, and that Barbara's Coca-Cola had been laced to immobilize her. Once done, they took her to the bridge where they proceeded to brutally gang rape her. Then this mystery third boy strangled her to death before she was thrown over the bridge's railing. The letter was handed over to the police, but nothing was left behind to identify its author. And besides, the police wrote it off as a hoax and seemingly did little to no follow-up regarding it. On December 21st, the police once again utilized 3D sonar technology, but came back empty-handed once more. Meanwhile, the two boys heard of the letter and willingly surrendered themselves for a second polygraph test. They came forward in response to the anonymous letter sent to Barbara's parents. The boys passed once more. The police did not let anyone outside of their parents, not even Barbara's family, witness the tests, and while they passed, they supposedly failed on some individual questions. Which ones were not disclosed. Her father was left skeptical as to whether the tests even happened at all. Although exactly how they reached this conclusion is unknown, her parents even hired experts of their own who ruled that the polygraph test was administered improperly. By January 4, 2017, after nearly 40 nonstop days, the search was finally called off. It was deemed infeasible to continue as the river completely froze during the winter. Barbara's father attempted to continue the search in other ways. He tried to obtain CCTV footage from the pizzeria and any other cameras in town. If Barbara appeared to be drugged in the footage, it could verify the letter's authenticity. Instead, the police simply dismissed him, didn't humor the suggestion, and bluntly told him that he had no right to such a thing. It didn't stop with just the footage. Every time he went to the station and asked for updates, he was told to leave and that he had no right to know of any developments. Barbara's father now had a severe distrust of the police. If it was truly an accident, it would make little sense for the police to be so secretive about the investigation. Most of Sentai's population agreed. On January 11th, he organized a protest, 100 people strong in the town square. An online petition was set up for those who couldn't attend in person, and it reached 1,000 signatures. Luckily, their efforts paid off. Less than a week later, Europol began involved in the investigation, and the Serbian police issued a yellow notice with Interpol. The director of their local police even met personally with Barbara's parents and pledged to be more forthcoming going forward. They even announced that once the river thawed in the spring, not only would the search resume, but it would be expanded with search and rescue teams from Miskolc, Hungary joining in. When they saw the report, it said that the first report made to the police by one of the boys came 10 minutes after the police arrived at their home to tell them about Barbara's accident. The police showed up to their doorstep at 10:15 p.m., but according to the police reports, they didn't report the accident to the police until 10:25 p.m. The police failed to perform any drug and alcohol tests on the two either. The police finally pulled some surveillance footage, but it didn't capture much. The police said it showed them leaving a market and walking toward the bridge. But really, it only captured them crossing the street and out of the camera's view. As they were out of its range, it could not capture whether they went right or left toward the bridge. Why they were at the market also hasn't been answered. February 27th, the ice had melted enough for another boat, complete with sonar, to scan and search the river once more for any traces of Barbara. They scanned up to 122 kilometers worth of river, but failed to find anything the previous searches didn't. By April 9th, winter was entirely over, and so another round of extensive searches had begun. Searches were conducted weekly, sometimes constantly for 3 days out of the week. Almost every boat on the river was equipped with sonar. The search effort now extended out as far as Obexkansi, and as promised, rescue teams from neighboring Hungary were brought in, and they were equipped with sniffer dogs. In July, the first of what would become a recurring trend in this case occurred. Barbara's mother was called one after another by a group of people who didn't know each other. All of them came from Greece and reported seeing Barbara, recognizing her from the Interpol notice. Greek police were contacted, but nothing more appears to have come of it. On April 10, 2018, her parents saw a brief snippet from a live stream which featured in it a girl who appeared to be Barbara. Her family identified her both based on the eyes and a scar, but furthermore, when the names of her family and dog were mentioned in the live chat, she had a visible reaction to them. And unfortunately, nobody knew where the video was being filmed. Around the same time, others saw her getting out of a Jeep with tinted windows. These leads were presented by public groups dedicated to independently tracking down missing persons. Barbara's father eventually went to Hungary himself to ask about the local police, but none of the officers they spoke to claimed to even know who Barbara was. They even checked their databases for him, but no reports of Barbara ever came by them. When he returned to Serbia and said this to the media, the police said that the claim was an outright lie. Later that May, Barbara was allegedly sighted in Timisoara, Romania by the locals. Barbara's parents traveled to Romania and were joined by local police. Together they searched all around Timisoara, including the rural terrain outside the city. Reports also came in from Albania, Montenegro, Croatia, and Bulgaria. Although the circumstances were unclear as to why, even the police in Switzerland had been contacted about her disappearance. Hungary, though, remained the most promising country for the investigation, and Hungarian police investigated many leads of their own. Her parents also had so much faith in Hungary that they left Serbia and moved to Hungary. The police also promised that they would stand up for their daughter's case, an assurance they felt their local police weren't giving them. It also seemed as if they themselves didn't believe she had fallen off the bridge and drowned. Their plans to move would fall through, and they opted to stay in Serbia. With how promising a lead Hungary appeared to be, missing persons posters of Barbara were posted all over the country. Another truly tragic development occurred on March 5, 2019. Barbara's older brother suffered from severe chronic diseases, multiple disabilities, and epilepsy for most of his life. On that day, he finally passed away from what the hospital deemed to be AH1N1 influenza. He was 25 years old. His family had lost a second child, and by all accounts, they now seemed to be alone. Later in 2019, several independent witnesses came forward claiming Barbara was working in the kitchen of a hunting lodge in Hungary's Tolona County. The police looked into hunting lodges throughout the county to try and find the one she worked at, but to no avail. Barbara's parents then resorted to hiring private investigators, but they failed to bring them any new leads. In September 2019, pictures also surfaced of a woman in a nightclub. Those who saw those photos identified her as Barbara. By the time police arrived at the nightclub, she was gone and apparently not a regular, so they had little reason to suspect she'd return. In mid-November, her father was sent a text message, complete with a photo of what appeared to be Barbara, at a cafe in Budapest. The last sighting that I could find was on August 17, 2020. An ambulance was called to Rákóczi Square in Budapest because a woman had fallen ill. She was described as well-groomed and was wearing a faded, mauve-colored t-shirt with jeans, carrying a small crossbody bag. Responding paramedics recognized her as Barbara, and when she was brought to the hospital, the staff recognized her as well. She refused to give her name to the staff. Shortly afterward, she left the hospital before the police could show up. During all these sightings, her parents said that since 2017, not a single institution from Serbia even contacted them once about their daughter's disappearance. And whenever they themselves reached out, the police offered no response. While the Serbian police believed that she simply fell from the bridge and drowned, hardly any members of the general public buy that story. And as her case is still actively investigated in Hungary, it seems they don't believe that story either. As of now, the most popular theory is that Barbara Vitez is still alive, likely in Hungary, but whether she ran away willingly or was perhaps kidnapped is unknown. Story 2. A woman who escaped a violent domestic situation with her young son suddenly starts exhibiting weird behaviors. When her mother returns home after a few hours, all of her daughter's belongings are gone, and she and her son are nowhere to be found. Where are Sophia and Matteo Van Dam? 2023. Hello everyone. As always, I'd like to thank you for all your comments and votes under my last post about Janiyah Walker. The first hope that she will be found safe and soon. Today I'd like to bring up a case of a double disappearance of a mother and her young son. Background. Sophia Van Dam was 20 when she went missing with her son, Matteo, also spelled as Matteo, Van Dam, who was 2, from Beaufort, Sumter County, South Carolina, USA. Sophia grew up in Beaufort as the youngest of 5. She graduated from Battery Creek High School a year early, when she was pregnant with her son, and then went on to obtain a welding certification. At 16, Sophia had ran away from home, but Desiree Pevy, her sister, said that she was free to return anytime she'd need or want. Teresa Van Dam, Sophia's mother, said that ever since then her daughter had a tendency to spend time with the wrong crowd. Sophia lived in Sumter with her son and boyfriend, Jonas Jerry Washington Jr., 24 yo, for a few months before she and her son went missing. The neighbors said that the Van Dams were quiet and kept to themselves. They sometimes saw Sophia mowing the front lawn, while little Matteo would run around and play on the porch. Sophia's and Jonas Jr.'s relationship had allegedly gotten violent in the past. Jonas Jr. is currently under arrest on unrelated charges. Teresa described her daughter as very bright, very smart, very street smart, bubbly, a leader, and said that she liked to make people laugh. Her grandson was very inquisitive, and that he wants to be outside, wants to explore. Disappearance. On the 4th of June, Sophia called Teresa to explain to her that something happened between her and her boyfriend, and that she wanted to stay at her family home in Beaufort with Matteo. There are also records that show that police responded to a domestic call that came from the Sumter home that day. Weeks before that, however, Sophia asked, during a phone call with Teresa, if her parents would be okay if she called them in the middle of the night, and said that she needs to come home. Teresa last saw Sophia and Matteo on 1 a.m. of the 21st of June. Sophia appeared confused, and she would do things like repeating what she just said multiple times. Teresa wanted to take her to a hospital on a suspicion of a psychotic breakdown, but Sophia refused. When Teresa came home at 3:30 a.m., both her daughter and grandson were gone. The doors were locked, and all of their items were gone, and the house was in disarray. The last contact Teresa had with Sophia was a text conversation on the 24th of June. Teresa said that her daughter was saying crazy things, which she attributed to the recent turbulence in her daughter's life. However, she also speculated that Sophia might have been under the influence of drugs, as she was talking out of her mind. In the conversation, Sophia said that she was coming back to her home in Sumter. Desiree said that all the calls to her sister have been going to voicemail since the 26th of June. She noted that it was unusual, as Sophia was known to have a phone at hand. The last ping from Sophia's cell phone was registered near Santee Cooper Lake on Interstate 95 inches, most likely referring to Lake Marion. When the investigators arrived at Sophia's home on the 28th of June to perform a wellness check requested by Teresa, they've discovered that her car was still in the driveway. It was taken into police custody for forensic testing. Mateo's car seat was also found in the car. When they knocked on the doors, however, nobody answered. A neighbor said that the last time he saw anyone in Sophia's car, it was a group made up of 2 guys and a little kid, but they noted that the child didn't look like Mateo. It's not clear when the sighting took place. Jonas Jr. was arrested on the 30th of June on unrelated charges for fleeing to evade arrest, trespassing, and being a fugitive from justice related to the 2021 charges in Beaufort County for possession of a weapon in the commission of a violent crime, kidnapping, larceny, and burglary related to an alleged carjacking. He was out on bail for the 2021 charges. In August, a property that belonged to Jonas's father was searched. Jonas Sr. isn't considered a suspect, and he had no idea why his property was even searched. Conclusion: I feel like the way timeline was relayed for this case was very confusing, with dates changing between sources and different details being mixed up with each other. I did my best to make sense of it, but please tell me if there's a mistake, especially the day of last contact, the 21st of June. It kept changing between the 21st and 22nd. Which I'm assuming is due to the events happening at night. Sophia's poor mental state shortly before she went missing is worrying me. There hasn't been anything said about her having a mental illness, and Teresa seemed to be concerned for her well-being, which suggests that it was something that happened at random, and not something like an attack of a mental illness her family knew about. I wonder if something happened that triggered a decline of Sophia's mental health, like a phone call with Jonas Jr. Teresa seems to believe he was involved. Of course, it's also possible that Sophia's sudden onset didn't have anything to do with a specific situation, and more just with the overall stress she was under at the time. Pure speculation here, but I wonder if Sophia might have been a drug user, and that's what caused her to behave strangely. It was kind of implied by Teresa, but only when she was referring to Sophia after she went missing. It's possible she was taking drugs while she was still in her family home. I don't say this with an intent to judge Sophia, but to consider a scenario that might have taken place. It's hard to not wonder if Jonas Jr. didn't have anything to do with the disappearance of Sophia and Mateo. We know that their relationship got physical in the past, and some kind of conflict between them was the reason why Sophia and Mateo moved to Sophia's parents in the first place. There doesn't seem to be any specific details to link the disappearance in Jonas Jr., or at least none that we know about. I wonder if the sighting of strange people in Sophia's car after she went missing had anything to do with Jonas Jr. Did he know these people? Sure. There's a chance that Sophia and Mateo died due to misadventure or suicide. Given Sophia's altered mental state at the time, perhaps she felt like Mateo and her were in danger, so they packed up and left, and then had an accident or committed suicide. There's also a chance that they were murdered, maybe by Jonas Jr., or by a stranger who saw their opportunity when they saw a vulnerable mother and her child. There's also a chance that they are still alive, but where are they then? Why would Sophia not want to contact her loving and supportive family, especially when she probably has her young son with her? The house Sophia had been renting was officially released by the law enforcement. That will allow Teresa and other family members to retrieve Sophia's and Mateo's things and get a good look at the house to find any potential clues. It's unclear if anything came out of it. Story 3. On June 8, 2008, an arsonist was caught on camera firebombing the Texas governor's mansion. The arsonist has never been identified. The governor's mansion in Austin is one of Texas' most treasured landmarks and one of the oldest in-use buildings in the state. It was built back in 1854 and has been the traditional home for governors and their families for generations. In 2008, it was the residence of Governor Rick Perry and family, though they had relocated months prior due to renovations. At 2 a.m. on June 8, 2008, firefighters arrived to the mansion from multiple 911 calls. A giant blaze started on the porch and destroyed much of the front. The investigation proved people's suspicions. Security footage showed an unidentified man throwing a Molotov cocktail on the porch that night at 1:27 a.m. The mansion itself would survive and be operational in 2012 after an extensive multi-million-dollar restoration, this time including a sprinkler system. A description of the man off the footage was created and released by Texas Rangers. White male in his 20s, 5 feet 9 to 6 feet tall, wearing a Texas University ball cap. On June 4, 2008, Days before the attack, 3 men in a Jeep were spotted visiting the mansion, taking pictures from the vehicle. The Jeep model was found after one by one, eliminating over 3,000 Jeeps until they found the owner, who named his 2 passengers. One of the passengers was in downtown Austin at the time of the fire and was a known member of Austin Affinity Group, who, in August of 2008, multiple members were arrested for creating Molotovs and preparing to use them in a violent demonstration at the Republican National Convention. Nobody from the Jeep or the Austin Affinity Group has been named or charged for the firebombing. They didn't have enough evidence to pursue charges against them beyond circumstantial. With the statute of limitations ending in 2018, this is likely going to stay a mystery. Story 4. Amy Todd Fleming. January 11th, 1996, Lee County, Illinois. January 11th, 1996. Special education teacher Amy Todd Fleming, age 25, didn't show up to work, and by 9:30 a.m., 2 of her co-workers made a devastating discovery. Amy was found murdered in her home. Despite an extensive investigation involving local law enforcement and the FBI, Amy's murder remains unsolved. Her family and community have not given up their search for answers. Before the FBI was brought in, 8 different police agencies assisted in the investigation, putting in over 2,000 man-hours. Zales. DeKalb County Sheriff's Chief Deputy Kevin Hickey said Illinois State Police helped in the search on the ground and from the sky. Police also used a plane donated by a resident to search for clues and leads. During the investigation, the Lee County Sheriff's Department received at least 2 letters from an anonymous writer who claimed to be very familiar with the circumstances surrounding Amy's murder. These letters began arriving in late January, a couple of weeks after the murder, and have been described as very helpful to the investigation. Sheriff Tim Bivens wanted the writer to come forward for a personal interview to provide additional details. Police offered to keep the letter writer's name confidential, but still have not received a response. The police remained tight-lipped about the content of the letters, but they believed, from the contents of the letter, that the writer was sincere in wanting to assist in solving the case. One of Amy's family members was the last known person to have contact with her the night before she was murdered. The family member spoke with Amy on the phone around 8:30 p.m. on January 10th. Amy was alone that night, and her husband, Derek, was at a cattle show out of state. Amy. It is my understanding that Derek was cleared and isn't a suspect in his wife's death. Investigators believed Amy may have known her killer enough to let the person into her home. Some items, microwave or VCR, were stolen from the home, but I believe her purse was untouched. The robbery aspect appeared staged. Story 5. In 1945, the bodies of Ethel Sparks, 18, and George Tyson, 34, were found in a Rockport, Indiana field. The investigation into their deaths unearthed potential links to organized crime, a connection to another murder, and a pig, whose miraculous survival resulted in the discovery of a crime scene. On the night of October 27, 1945, 54-year-old widow Martha Brandenburg was peacefully sleeping in her rural Sulphur, Indiana home when a sudden, frantic knock startled her awake. Opening the door, Martha found her 15-year-old neighbor, Lucy Berkeley. Lucy informed Martha that her barn was on fire. Around 10:45 p.m., Lucy and her boyfriend, Harley Walton, were returning from a date when they spotted the blaze from the road. While Lucy rushed to inform Martha of the situation, Harley tried in vain to extinguish the fire before seeking help from a neighbor. Unfortunately, the flames spread rapidly, engulfing the entire structure within minutes. As Martha stood by helplessly watching her uninsured barn succumb to the flames, her thoughts turned to her animals. Fortunately, her 3 cows had been left to graze in the pasture that evening. However, Martha was suddenly struck with a pang of dread. Her beloved pet pig, a 75-pound crippled sow she had rescued from certain euthanasia, was locked inside a stall within the barn. Martha expressed her sadness over the loss of her pig to Lucy. Lucy reassured her that the animal was safe, having spotted the sow on her way to inform Martha about the fire. As Martha surveyed the field, she was astonished to find her pig peacefully sleeping in the grass, unharmed. Puzzled by how the sow, with its very limited mobility, could have possibly escaped on its own, Martha simply accepted it as a fortunate miracle. The following morning, however, as the shock of the previous night began to fade, Martha's thoughts again returned to the pig. A chilling scenario suddenly ran through her mind. Perhaps a tramp had sought shelter in the barn and inadvertently released the sow before falling victim to the fire themselves. Martha began sifting through the barn's remains, searching for anything to suggest someone had been inside. She unearthed an umbrella frame, alarm clock, a pair of scissors, a tin can filled with metal buttons, tweezers, and several charred pieces of clothing, none of which she recognized as hers. Martha traveled to the nearby English, Indiana police station to present the items she had recovered from her barn to Sheriff Lavelle. Lavelle accompanied Martha back to her property, and upon his own investigation, unearthed a pair of earrings and the remnants of a woman's handbag in the debris where the barn once stood. Meanwhile, 60 miles away, just outside of Rockport, Indiana, police were grappling with a perplexing mystery of their own that afternoon. Local farmer John Spalletti had stumbled upon a patch of freshly disturbed earth in one of his expansive fields. As he inspected the area closely, he noticed a distinctive rake mark pattern on the loose dirt. John immediately suspected that loot from a recent bank robbery might be concealed beneath the disturbed soil. On the night of October 18th, an unknown number of individuals forcibly entered Richland, Indiana's Lake State Bank, located just under 15 miles from John's farm, with the intent of plundering the bank's safety deposit boxes. The perpetrators successfully absconded with an undisclosed quantity of jewelry and cash from the boxes. The robbery remained undetected until the following morning, as the thieves had also stolen the bank's alarm system. After notifying the sheriff of his discovery, John enlisted the help of a neighbor, and the pair began to dig. However, when they unearthed a woman's shoe, instead of the expected stolen money, they ceased their efforts and awaited the arrival of police. With law enforcement present, the digging resumed. Approximately 1.5 feet below the surface, the men made a horrifying discovery: the bodies of two individuals, a man and a young woman, interred in the dirt. The body of the man, who appeared to be middle-aged, was discovered positioned atop the younger woman's body. He was fully clothed, dressed in a gray business suit over an olive green dress shirt. The young woman was described as a young teen. She had brunette hair, weighed 110 pounds, and was wearing a sweater and matching skirt. Hidden within the young woman's bra, police found $3,200 in cash, tightly wrapped in an envelope. No identification was found on either individual. However, a matchbook from the 121 Club, a betting parlor for horse racing located in Jeffersonville, Indiana, was recovered from the man's pocket. An autopsy revealed that the man had been subjected to a brutal beating before being fatally shot, twice in the abdomen, once in the head, and once in the heart, with a .38 caliber pistol. The woman's injuries were much more severe. Her face had been horrifically disfigured, with an instrument resembling a screwdriver. A rope was found so tightly secured around her neck, it had cut deeply into her flesh, and her body bore numerous bruises, cuts, and defensive wounds. She too had been executed, with 2 gunshot wounds to the head, one of which went through her right eye, with a .38 caliber pistol. After taking their fingerprints, it wasn't long before the pair were identified as 34-year-old George Tyson, a father and husband from East St. Louis, Illinois, and 18-year-old Ethel Mallory Sparks, a waitress from the same area. As fate would have it, George was a wanted man. 3 months prior, on July 16th, 27-year-old union ironworker Joe Callahan was seated in his vehicle outside Dolly's Tavern, a local dive bar in Madison, Illinois. He was accompanied by several friends, including 22-year-old Catherine Morrison, a waitress at the establishment. According to Catherine and the other witnesses present, 2 men approached the vehicle and engaged in a heated argument with Joe. After one assailant struck Joe in the head, he exited the vehicle, and a brief physical altercation ensued. When Joe returned to the car, one of the assailants produced a firearm and shot Joe before fleeing the scene. Despite sustaining severe injuries, Joe miraculously survived. Both Joe and Catherine quickly identified the gunman as George Tyson, a former union ironworker who was known to frequent the bar where Catherine worked. George, however, managed to evade capture and remained at large. 1 week later, however, a tragic turn of events unfolded within the same establishment. As Catherine sat at one of the tavern's booths that evening, an unknown individual silently cut the screen of a nearby window and inserted the barrel of a 12-gauge shotgun. A single shot rang out, striking Catherine and fatally wounding her. George was immediately identified as a prime suspect in the shooting. During witness interviews, detectives learned Catherine was seated at the booth with another woman, Ethel Sparks, the rumored mistress of George Tyson. Ethel was subsequently interviewed, but denied being present at the time of the shooting or having a relationship with George. She was released, however, 1 week later. Ethel left town. Following the identification of George and Ethel, Detectives focused their investigation on the matchbook discovered in George's pocket. This led them to Jeffersonville, Indiana, where authorities uncovered evidence that George and Ethel had rented an apartment together under the assumed names of Mr. and Mrs. George Harris. According to local residents, the couple were reclusive, spending most of the day indoors and venturing out only at night. Neighbors told detectives they had last spotted the pair on October 27th, when they were seen entering a vehicle with 3 unidentified men in fancy suits. They reported that the 5 individuals departed in the morning, returned briefly that evening, and were observed leaving the residence again with some of their belongings in hand. Upon learning of the discovery of the pair's bodies, Sheriff Lavelle contacted the investigating department to inform them about the items recovered from Martha's barn. Law enforcement presented these items to several employees of local Jeffersonville establishments, as well as neighbors of George and Ethel's. Multiple individuals positively identified the earrings as belonging to Ethel. Furthermore, Martha was presented with the piece of rope found around Ethel's neck and confirmed it matched the type of rope she stored in her barn. Police now possessed enough information for a plausible timeline of events. They theorized that on October 27th, the 3 men in suits forcibly abducted the couple from their Jeffersonville apartment and transported them to Sulphur. At this location, the pair were tortured and ultimately murdered within Martha's barn. The assailants then set fire to the barn in an attempt to destroy evidence. George and Ethel's bodies were then transported to Rockport and buried on John's farm. As the investigation progressed, Alice Tyson, George's wife, came forward to claim the remains of her deceased husband and lay claim to the money discovered in Ethel's bra. Alice asserted that these funds originated from the recent sale of the couple's house. However, it was later revealed that the house, described as shabby and rundown, had sold for a mere $600 due to a substantial mortgage. During her interview with law enforcement, Alice stated that she had last seen George the day prior to the shooting of Joe Callahan. She also denied any knowledge of his relationship with Ethel. Following the police interview, she departed town with their 8-year-old son. Ethel Sparks' parents traveled from their Arkansas hometown of Stuttgart to claim the remains of their deceased daughter. They explained that Ethel had left a year prior in search of employment opportunities in East St. Louis. However, they hadn't spoken to her in several months. They claimed to have no knowledge of George and Ethel's alleged relationship. The Sparks family also asserted their claim to the recovered funds, suggesting the money was most likely their daughter's life savings. Further investigation into Ethel's life revealed her association with several known criminal figures. Upon moving to East St. Louis, she secured employment as a waitress at an illicit casino operated by the wife of gangster Art Newman. During her tenure there, Ethel witnessed a shooting involving a man named Patrick Hogan, a prominent figure in the gambling underworld. Bizarrely, Patrick's body was never found, and he was never seen again. Law enforcement also discovered that following the shooting, Ethel had taken residence in an apartment situated above the Paddock Bar, owned by notorious gang boss Frank Buster Wortman. Unfortunately, any potential connection between Ethel's relationships with these criminal figures and her subsequent murder could not be proven. Ethel Mallory Sparks was laid to rest in Stuttgart, Arkansas's Lone Tree Cemetery. George Rosby Tyson was buried in Williamson Cemetery located in Montgomery County, Georgia. Regrettably, despite an investigation spanning several years, the case was never solved. Story 6. The 2001 disappearance of Sharon Davis. An unsolved mystery segment is produced about the case, but never airs after her husband sends the show an accusatory letter. In 2001, Sharon Eugenia Davis was a 51-year-old schoolteacher living in Dallas, Texas, with her husband of 21 years, Ron Davis. This case. The couple's 2 children were both attending the University of Texas at Arlington, with their son, Ronnie, living on campus, and daughter, Autumn, still living at home. At around 7:30 a.m. on the morning of June 13th, Sharon climbed into her minivan and dropped off Autumn at a bus depot so she could go work her summer job. Afterward, Sharon was planning to return home to change her clothes before attending a training session at her school, but she never arrived there. When Sharon failed to return home that night, her 2 children asked Ron to report her missing, but he did not do so until the following morning. On June 18th, Sharon's abandoned minivan was discovered in the parking lot of a Bally Total Fitness club she sometimes frequented, located less than a mile from her home. The van was wiped clean of fingerprints, and one of the windows was broken. Employees from the club would claim they first recalled seeing the van in the parking lot sometime after midnight on June 14th. Suspicion soon turned towards Ron, who was very uncooperative and avoided a police interview for 3 weeks. His marriage to Sharon was a very troubled one, and in 1985, she took the children and started driving to California to stay with relatives. She intended to divorce Ron, but ultimately changed her mind and returned home to reconcile with him. In spite of this, Ron continued to be emotionally and verbally abusive towards Sharon, and on June 11th, just 2 days before she went missing, she finally contacted an attorney and officially filed for divorce. Sharon was planning to request sole possession of their house and control of more than half of their family's assets, but her attorney advised her to remain in the home until the divorce proceedings went through. Even though Ron was not officially served with the divorce papers, Sharon did warn him they were coming and asked her daughter not to leave her alone with him. According to Autumn, on the night before she went missing, Sharon asked her to move one of the vehicles out of the driveway because Ron had to leave for a breakfast business meeting the following morning. Autumn found this odd, since it was uncharacteristic for Ron to conduct business during the early morning hours, but when she woke up at 6:30 a.m., Ron was not at the house and never returned before her mother drove her to the bus depot. Questioned by police, Ron would not share any specific details about this so-called breakfast meeting. He expressed his belief that Sharon ran away voluntarily and claimed she had taken over $10,000 in cash which they had been keeping inside the house, though he refused to show them the location where this money was supposedly kept. Ron also said that Sharon was mentally ill and put forward the idea that she voluntarily checked into a mental institution, but everyone else in Sharon's life denied that she suffered from any form of mental illness. In September, Ronnie Davis drove from his campus dorm to his family's house in order to confront his father and demand to know what happened to Sharon. A heated confrontation broke out, which prompted Ron to grab a gun and point it at his son. Ronnie went to the authorities and filed a felony assault charge against Ron, but a grand jury ultimately decided not to indict him. Ronnie and Autumn would eventually stop speaking with their father and believed that he was responsible for what happened to their mother. Eventually captured the attention of Unsolved Mysteries, who filmed and produced a segment about Sharon's disappearance. While Ron was contacted about doing an on-camera interview, he declined to do so. The segment was scheduled to air during the spring of 2002, but plans were halted when Ron sent the producers of the show an accusatory letter, and the segment has never seen the light of day. The week after Sharon went missing, Ron hired an attorney named Cheryl Watley, but she stopped representing him about a year later. In April 2003, Ron filed suit against Watley, alleging that she owed him a partial refund of a $10,000 retainer he paid her. The case went to small claims court, but now that they were on opposing sides in a civil trial, attorney-client privilege would be stripped away, so Watley was under no obligation to remain silent about anything Ron told her. At the trial, Watley testified that Ron had expressed concern that his wife's disappearance might lead to other investigations into his alleged involvement in tax evasion and money laundering. Indeed, Ron was once on the executive board of the Dallas branch of the NAACP, but was suspended because of some irregularities in one of their elections. He responded by incorporating a new chapter of the NAACP, which he ran out of his home, and also started the Dallas Economic Development Corporation, a nonprofit and tax-exempt organization that supposedly provided services to low-income individuals. Watley also claimed that Ron told her to do a television interview in which she painted Sharon as mentally ill or a drug addict, but she refused to do so. In the end, the jury ruled in Watley's favor and awarded her $1,558 in damages. But the investigation has remained at a standstill, and Sharon Davis is still a missing person. Story: 13-year-old girl disappears on the way to school. Where is Denise Hireman? Early in the morning on Friday, August 27, 1999, Sita Baran left her home in the Queens, NY neighborhood of Richmond Hill to go work. Her 13-year-old daughter, Denise Hireman, usually left the house at around 8:15 a.m. to make the short walk to the bus stop, where she would catch the bus to her school. When Ms. Baring got a call from the school later that day that Denise hadn't shown up, she initially wasn't too worried, since Denise sometimes skipped school. However, when she got home from work and Denise still wasn't home, family and friends drove around and searched for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Her mother filed a missing persons report, and Denise hasn't been heard from in the 25 years since that day. At the time of her disappearance, Denise had been hanging out with a group of friends that her mother described as a rough crowd, with some shady characters in it. Her mother denies that Denise was a gang member, although some reports do state that she was affiliated with a gang at the time of her disappearance. Denise smoked cigarettes and is described as often dressing suggestively and would cut decorative holes into her clothes. She had a fake ID that said she was 18 and enjoyed going dancing and might try to use the ID to get into clubs. Her mother suspects that someone Denise was acquainted with knows more about her disappearance than they are saying. In addition to the rough crowd Denise had been a part of, there were some suspicious men who often hung around the neighborhood and nearby schools, and a close friend of Denise's, who lived in the apartment below hers, left and never returned home, and while most assumed that she had just left town and never gotten in touch again, Denise's mother has always suspected that there is more to it than that. And perhaps the cases are connected. Denise's case was initially classified as a runaway, but in 2005 was changed to be classified as endangered missing. At the time she went missing, Denise was 5 feet 3, weighed 90 pounds, and had brown hair and brown eyes. She is described as an Asian female of Guyanese descent. Guyana has a sizable population descended from Indian indentured servants who came over during the British colonial era, and speaks English and Guyanese Creole. She may dye her hair and/or wear colored contact lenses that change the color of her eyes. She may have traveled to Minnesota, Twin Cities, Florida, Georgia, Ontario, Canada, the island of Trinidad, or elsewhere in New York State after she went missing. If she's still alive, Denise would be 39 years old. I feel like Denise's disappearance is connected to that shady group she was hanging around with. She seems a prime candidate for sex trafficking. Whether she ran away on her own, was coerced into leaving, or was forcibly kidnapped or trafficked, I don't think the outcome was good. I wonder if there are any Jane Does in any of the areas that she may have traveled to that match her description. Story 8 to 500 years later, a new clue relating to Princes in the Tower is found. If you're unaware, Princes in the Tower were 12-year-old Edward V, the heir to the throne, and his brother Richard, Duke of York. They were sons of Edward IV. After Edward IV's death in 1483, the regent became his brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who lodged the boys into the Tower of London, where Edward V was to await his coronation. In the meantime, however, both boys were declared illegitimate by the Parliament, and Richard ascended the throne as Richard III. After that, the fate of the princes is unclear and remains one of the biggest historical mysteries. Once Richard became the king, the boys were seen less and less until disappearing completely sometime in the summer of 1483. The common theory is that he ordered their murder to secure his hold on the throne. Said theory gained further notoriety after children's skeletons had been found in the tower in 1674. They were buried with, among other things, velvet, which might suggest aristocratic belonging of the deceased. Furthermore, their location matched one of the accounts of where the princes were held during their time in the tower. The skeletons were, however, incomplete and not the first ones to have been dug out at the location. 1933 examination of them suggested they belonged to 2 children, matching the ages of the princes. At the same time, it was criticized for being carried out specifically to prove the skeletons belonged to the princes without an effort made to properly identify them, e.g. establish the gender of the deceased. Currently, the bones remain in the Westminster Abbey and had not been the subject of further examination. There was a petition to DNA test them at one point, but it was taken down months before the established closing time. That is to say, the evidence of what happened to the princes is circumstantial at best, and there's no concrete proof of what happened and how it happened. By the end of 2024, however, a new discovery had been made by Professor Tim Thornton of the University of Huddersfield. Thornton was going through documents in the National Archives, motivated by the lack of the information on Prince's belongings and what happened to them, when he stumbled upon the registry copy of a will of one Lady Margaret Capel. Drafted in 1516, the will states, "I bequeath to my son, Sir Giles, his fadrous chain, which was youngy King Edward V, that is, the chain belonging to Edward V, has somehow found its way into the belongings of Lady Margaret Capel." The discovery is notable because chain of office, otherwise called a livery collar, signified either holding an office or a mark of fealty. But how is Lady Margaret related to the princes in the Tower? Well, she was the sister-in-law of Sir James Tyrrell, working, at the time of Prince's disappearance, for Richard III. Indeed, Tyrrell had been suggested as the prince's murderer by Thomas More in his History of King Richard III, King's vastly unflattering biography written between 1512 to 1519 and published after More's death. The account has been previously dismissed by historians as Tudor propaganda, since More has been a mere boy at the time of Richard III's death, and in adulthood, pleaded allegiance to the Tudor dynasty. Thornton's discovery may suggest, however, that More might have had a genuine reason to implicate Tyrrell in his work. That is not to say the discovery proves anything. It is, however, both exciting and fascinating to find a mention of Edward V's very personal belonging that has somehow found its way into the hands of Tyrrell's family member, and was mentioned in a will mere 33 years after the boy's disappearance. Per the words of Thornton, there are various possible reasons for the chain passing into the hands of the Capel family. Some are neutral or benign, perhaps part of a process of dispersing the goods of the princes once their status had changed. But the connection with Sir James Tyrrell adds to the probability that the 2 boys had died in the way that has traditionally been described. What do you think? Does finding the mention of a chain implicates Richard III further, or is it, as Thornton suggested, a mere redistribution of goods? 9. Orlando, November 17, 2011. Michelle Parker vanished. Michelle Parker, 33, was last seen on November 17, 2011, dropping off her then 3-year-old twins at their father's home at the Carter Glen Condominiums, Orlando. 2:30 p.m. she visited with family members at her mother's, Yvonne Stewart, salon in Oviedo. She left to pick up her twins from daycare. According to her mother, she was planning to head home after dropping the twins off with ex-fiancé Dale Smith Jr., 41st. Around 3:15 p.m., she texted her boyfriend at the time, Nathan Mitchell. At 3:17 p.m., Michelle was seen on a security cam in the area as she drove to his home. It's unclear why security cam did not catch the moment when she, or at least her Hummer, left the area. It might be due to the angle of the camera. 3:30 p.m., Michelle's 11-year-old son arrived home from school. Shortly thereafter, he called his grandmother, Michelle's mom, asking where his mother was. Yvonne Stewart was surprised to hear that Michelle wasn't home yet. She called her daughter's phone, but no one answered. Stewart tried to contact Smith several times, but she was unable to get in touch with him then. Around 4:30 p.m., her brother, Dustin Erickson, sent her a SMS and asked where she was. He got a SMS back that simply said Waterford, a possible reference to a nearby area. Waterford Lakes is outdoor mall 11 to 12 miles from Carter Glen Condominiums. I've read that area is called Waterford. Some speculate that someone else sent that SMS. Normally she sent longer messages, or at least smiley faces, XOs and hearts, etc. 4:30 p.m. According to Dale Smith Jr. attorney, he went to visit his parents with his children. 6:53 p.m. Michelle's sister was unsuccessful in her attempts to reach her by phone. 7:20 p.m. Sister reported her missing to police. Phone. 7:30 p.m. or 8 p.m. depends on the source. Michelle was scheduled to work that night at a local bar called The Barn in Sanford. She didn't show up, which was unusual. At about the same time, 8 p.m., her cell phone stopped transmitting a signal to a tower near Belle Isle, more than 7 miles where she was last seen. 8:55 p.m. The video shows Michelle's Hummer stopped at the intersection of Vineland and Conroy Roads. The following day, November 18, 2011, Michelle's 2008 black Hummer H3 was found in a parking lot at Walden Palms Apartments in the 4700 block of Walden Circle in Orlando. Decals for her mobile tanning business had been removed from the windows. Walden Palms is 1/2-3/4 of a mile from where her Hummer was caught on video. Now, November 26th, Orlando PD served a search warrant on Smith's parents' home on Rose Boulevard in Orlando. A police spokesman wouldn't reveal what, if anything, was found. 3 weeks after her disappearance, police found her phone in a lake near the Neela Bridge in Belle Isle. The lake is only 5-minute miss from the home of Dale Smith Jr. Michelle also worked at former Jesse Black Saloon on Oak Ridge, which is near where her phone last pinged. Parker and Smith had taped an episode of the show The People's Court in June 2011. She went missing on the same day the episode aired. Episode might air just before Michelle went to Dale's. August 2023, OPD searched the property of Dale Smith Sr. off Rose Boulevard, looking her remains under a concrete slab, but they said didn't find anything. They used ground-penetrating radar. Today they had a search warrant to look my daughter under that slab. Smith Sr. poured it without permit in 2012, Yvonne Stewart said. Now if you look at satellite image of that area, Rose Boulevard 2211, that concrete slab appeared somewhere 2014-2015, most likely 2014. The satellite images, I'm looking, are taken every year, most likely at the end of January. No big changes there through the years. There's a shed in the northwest corner of the plot, most likely. 2017 shed's roof or a terrace disappears. If you look at satellite image of Carter Glen Condominium, Goldenrod Rod, you can see that in 2011, IMO, end of January 2011, there were several undeveloped plots. During 2011 to early 2012, 2 houses were built. I hope those construction sites were investigated. 2012, at the FBI's urgent, police searched near the Carter Glen condominiums. They also searched the wooded R off Goldenrod Rod in the Lee Vista area, and more volunteers sourced the woods by Lake Moss Park. Story 10. Alexander the Great Mysterious Death. This case seems very interesting to me and I wanted to share it here, which is the death of Alexander the Great, which occurred in June 323 BC, at the young age of 32, remains one of history's most enduring mysteries. His passing followed a brief but severe illness lasting approximately 12 days, during which he experienced high fever and a progressive physical decline that ultimately left him unable to speak or move before his death was declared. Several theories have emerged over the centuries regarding the cause of Alexander's death. One prominent theory suggests that he may have been poisoned, possibly at a banquet. This idea has been debated extensively, with some historians arguing that the symptoms he exhibited were consistent with poisoning from substances such as arsenic or a toxic plant known as veratrum album, false hellebore. However, toxicologist Dr. Leo Shep has argued that the timeline of symptoms would not align with quick-acting poisons, making this theory less plausible. Another significant line of inquiry points to infectious diseases as potential causes of his demise. Candidates for these diseases include typhoid fever, which was common in ancient times due to unsanitary conditions, and malaria, particularly plausible given Alexander's campaigns in mosquito-infested regions. Some researchers have even proposed that Alexander may have suffered from West Nile virus, suggesting that symptoms described in historical accounts align with this viral infection. In 2018, Dr. Catherine Hall proposed an intriguing hypothesis. Alexander may have suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS, an autoimmune disorder characterized by muscle weakness and paralysis. This theory posits that he might not have been truly dead when his body was prepared for burial, leading to an erroneous declaration of death, a phenomenon known as pseudothanatos. Another possibility is that acute pancreatitis could have played a role in his death. Some historians suggest that heavy alcohol consumption may have led to acute, necrotizing pancreatitis, exacerbating his condition during his final days. Accounts from ancient historians like Plutarch describe ominous signs preceding Alexander's illness, including unusual behavior from animals and other portents. Additionally, it is said that his body did not show signs of decay for several days after his death, which fueled beliefs among contemporaries that he was divine or immortal. Despite extensive research and numerous theories, the exact cause of Alexander the Great's death remains speculative. Each theory has its merits and challenges, reflecting the complexities surrounding historical medical diagnoses and the limitations of ancient records. The mystery continues to captivate scholars and enthusiasts alike, underscoring both the intrigue of Alexander's life and the uncertainties surrounding his untimely demise. Story 11. In January 1954, the remains of a woman, identified as 32-year-old Mary Grimes Wallace, were discovered on a set of railroad tracks in Xenia, Ohio. When doubts were raised about the victim's identity, authorities were unable to locate the victim's body. What happened to Mary? Shortly before 8 a.m. on January 10, 1954, the Xenia, Ohio Police Department received a distressed call from the engineer of a westbound Pennsylvania Railroad locomotive. The engineer reported that as the train approached the Jasper Street crossing, he had observed a man hastily departing from the east side of the railway. Seconds later, he spotted a woman's horribly disfigured body lying between the tracks. Upon arrival at the scene, officers discovered the deceased woman lying face down, next to the eastbound set of railway tracks. Her injuries, including severe facial and skull trauma, as well as partial decapitation, were consistent with being struck by a train. However, little blood was found at the scene. The coroner was unable to definitively determine the woman's manner of death, listing it as either suicide or homicide. The deceased woman was tentatively identified as 32-year-old Mary Grimes Wallace, an employee at a local supper club. Her father, Oliver Wallace, was summoned to the morgue for positive identification. However, that proved challenging due to the significant facial trauma sustained by the victim. Ultimately, Oliver reluctantly agreed that the woman was most likely his daughter, Mary. Investigators learned that Mary was married, but separated from her husband. He had recently abandoned her and their two young children, James and Butch, before relocating to Oklahoma. Facing insurmountable challenges in providing for the children alone, Mary made the difficult decision to relinquish their custody to the state. Subsequently, James and Butch were separated and placed in state-operated orphanages. During the investigation, detectives also learned Mary was dating a man named William Brainerd. Now, neighbors reported that William, 46, oftentimes exhibited a volatile temper and had made repeated threats to kill Mary during these outbursts. These accounts were corroborated by Mary's close acquaintances, who revealed that she had confided in them about her desire to end the relationship, while simultaneously expressing concerns for her personal safety if she did so. Law enforcement promptly apprehended William and escorted him to the police station for questioning. During the interview, William denied any involvement in Mary's death. He stated that he had last seen her briefly at approximately 3 a.m. when she returned home from work, but claimed to have fallen asleep on the sofa and awoken to detectives knocking on the door hours later. Lacking an alibi, William was detained on suspicion of murder and confined to the county jail. 1 month later, due to the lack of conclusive proof that Mary was murdered, and with nothing linking him to her death, William was released. Detectives uncovered one other potential lead during their investigation. Just 9 days prior to her demise, Mary had apparently witnessed a homicide. Reports indicate that during a domestic dispute, an individual fatally shot their partner. While Mary was an eyewitness to the crime, the nature of her relationship, if any, with the individuals involved was never undisclosed. Unfortunately, this lead ultimately resulted in a dead end. Mary was interred in Silver Creek Cemetery 2 days after the discovery of her body's death. Despite the coroner's inability to determine her manner of death, no autopsy was performed, and neither blood nor fingerprint samples were collected. The case was subsequently closed. 5 years later, William Brimard unexpectedly paid a visit to the local police station to request a meeting with the sheriff. William informed Sheriff Bradley of persistent rumors circulating within the community that Mary was, in fact, alive. William implored Sheriff Bradley to investigate these rumors to definitively clear his name in connection with her death. Mary's family also sought an audience with the sheriff after hearing similar rumors. They relayed information from a close friend of Mary's, now residing in Cincinnati, who claimed to have spoken with Mary recently. This friend reported that Mary was living in Cincinnati, married, and had told her, "Remember, you never saw me," when she spotted Mary at a local bar. After showing Mary's family several post-mortem photographs of the deceased woman discovered on the railway tracks, all of them expressed their opinion that the deceased individual in the photographs was not Mary after all. With the deceased woman's identity now in question, Sheriff Bradley traveled to Cincinnati to investigate the reported sightings of Mary. There, he met with her friend, who reiterated the account previously provided to the family, stating that Mary was living in the city and had instructed her friend to deny any knowledge of her whereabouts. During his search, Sheriff Bradley encountered several individuals in local establishments who claimed to recognize Mary, but, despite these possible leads, his efforts to locate her proved unsuccessful. Skeptical yet still determined to close the case, Bradley acquired a set of Mary's fingerprints from her previous employment records at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He hoped that despite the passage of time, fingerprint analysis would prove that the train victim was indeed Mary. The exhumation of the presumed remains of Mary quickly commenced. However, upon opening the coffin designated by the gravestone inscribed with the last name Grimes, investigators discovered the remains of a different woman. Baffled by this discrepancy, they sought assistance from the church maintaining the burial records. Guided by these records, a second exhumation was conducted beneath a second stone also reading Grimes. Again, the remains of an individual other than Mary were found, this time, a man. Suspecting Mary was buried in an unmarked grave, cemetery workers, equipped with steel rods, meticulously probed the surrounding empty plots. This systematic search led to the discovery of an unmarked coffin, and Mary's family agreed it was the correct location. The dig resulted in finding a coffin consistent with the type Mary had been buried in. However, upon opening it, they were met with the remains of an unidentified male. Following the exhumation of the third incorrect body, investigators suspended their search. Unfortunately, despite their extensive efforts, the investigation failed to come to a definitive resolution. Mary was never seen again. However, the location of her remains, if they were indeed Mary's, is still unknown. My sources for this case are severely limited. Below you will find my usual newspaper clippings related to the incident. However, I failed to locate even one single photo of Mary. The second link directs you to the cemetery where Mary's remains were purportedly interred, but for obvious reasons is not linked to a specific grave. Story 12. The Belmez Faces. The Belmez Faces are a well-known alleged paranormal phenomenon that originated in 1971 at the home of Maria Gomez Camara in Belmez de la Moraleda, Spain. This phenomenon involves eerie face-like images appearing on the concrete floor of her house, which sparked widespread interest and speculation. The phenomenon began on August 23, 1971, when Maria noticed a face forming on her kitchen floor. Despite attempts to destroy the image, including using a pickaxe, new faces continued to appear in the same spot. This led to a significant influx of visitors to the house, which became known as La Casa de las Caras, the House of Faces. Over the years, various faces emerged, some described as skeletal or with distressing expressions, contributing to the local lore and attracting paranormal enthusiasts. The Belmez faces have been subject to extensive investigation and debate regarding their authenticity. Some researchers propose that they are a form of thoughtography, a phenomenon where images are supposedly produced by psychic means. However, many skeptics argue that the faces were deliberately painted or created as part of a hoax for financial gain. For instance, investigations revealed traces of pigments commonly used in paints, leading some experts to conclude that the faces were fabricated. Notably, after Maria's death in 2004, claims of new Belmez faces emerged, but these have also faced skepticism and allegations of being staged. A dedicated interpretation center has since been established in Belmez to educate visitors about this intriguing case and its historical context. The Belmez faces phenomenon has had a lasting impact on local culture and tourism. The site continues to draw visitors intrigued by its mysterious nature, contributing to a unique form of paranormal tourism that persists decades after the initial events. Despite ongoing debates about their authenticity, the Belmez faces remain an enigmatic part of Spain's cultural heritage. Story 13. This one gives me the chills. Phoenix couple's murder puzzles police year later. Who can put the pieces together? Or maybe you know something. In late June 2014, William Singer, 81, and his wife Barbara Singer, 64, were tragically murdered in their North Phoenix home near 35th and Grover's Avenues. Both had notable careers in the medical field, William as an EMT instructor and Barbara as a nurse practitioner, and were deeply involved in their community, with no known adversaries. Do that. Discovery of the crime. On July 2, 2014, a healthcare worker arrived at the Singer's residence for a scheduled appointment with William. Receiving no response and growing concerned, the worker contacted authorities. Upon entering the home, police discovered the couple deceased, with evidence suggesting they had been dead for several days. Notably, there were no signs of forced entry, indicating the possibility that the Singers knew their assailant or felt comfortable allowing them inside. Unusual ATM activity. Investigators uncovered surveillance footage from June 28, 2014, showing both William and Barbara making late-night ATM withdrawals around 10:30 p.m., unusual activity for the couple. Detectives observed that William appeared to be under duress during the transaction, leading to speculation that the couple may have been coerced into withdrawing money before being taken back to their home, where they were subsequently killed. Details of the murders. Upon investigation, it was revealed that both William and Barbara had been brutally murdered. William was found in his chair, having suffered fatal injuries, while Barbara's body was discovered in a different room, indicating they were attacked separately. The nature of their injuries suggested a violent encounter, though specific details about the cause of death have not been publicly disclosed by authorities. Investigation and public appeals. Despite extensive investigations, including interviews and the release of composite sketches of potential suspects, no arrests have been made, and the case remains unsolved. The Phoenix Police Department continues to seek information from the public to bring justice for William and Barbara Singer. Story 14. Missing info in Garrett Phillips documentary. Summary. On October 24, 2011, a kid named Garrett Phillips was murdered as he arrived home in Potsdam, NY after school. He was strangled and suffocated in his room. There were no eyewitnesses, but neighbors called the police when they heard a commotion and someone saying, "Help." They heard the apartment door lock after they knocked, and the killer jumped out of the back window and ran away, unseen. The ex-boyfriend of the boy's mother was named the primary suspect immediately after the murder. He was the soccer coach at the local college, and the two met at the bar she worked at. The below write-up raises questions about his story and points out evidence left out of the documentary. I watched this documentary years ago, and it really bothered me how it's still unsolved. It's also worth noting that Oral Nick Hillary participated in the documentary, and they chose to leave out key pieces of information from the show. The show does not mention. Nick was very upset after the breakup with Tandy, telling her she was letting her kids make decisions for her. Nick still had a key to Tandy's apartment after their breakup, and he let himself in twice after they separated. She even woke up and found him standing over her bed one night. She asked for her key back after that. Nick called his lawyer 48 minutes after the 911 call was placed by the neighbors. There is no mention of this and no explanation for this move by Nick. I'm not 100% convinced Nick Hillary is the killer, but his inability to explain why he turned left and followed Garrett out of the school parking lot 7 seconds after he left to go home is odd. He had no explanation for turning left except, "I sometimes drove by my assistant coach's house around then to see if he was home." He could not explain a significant scab on his ankle, finally saying he heard it moving furniture. He could not say what furniture he was moving. The timeline he and his daughter gave did not line up. He was not home and not with anyone during the time of the murder. She said they ate at 6 p.m., but she texted him at 6:24 asking what's for dinner. There's no one on the hospital cameras with Garrett going home. Whoever entered his home had to come in after he got home and get in without the neighbors next door hearing. There's a chance a friend or someone from school came in with him and killed him, but that's a hell of a jump from the second story for a child to make. I think Nick is the scapegoat due to his athleticism, his past conflict with Garrett, and him being in the same place at the same time as Garrett just minutes before the murder. It's really tough to call, and I certainly don't like pointing fingers unless I know for sure, but I wish the documentary had mentioned my above omitted points and made him address them. It would really clear his name. If you don't believe the above information implicates Nick Hillary, who else could have done this and gotten away with it? Who would have been capable of entering the house without detection, jumped the second-story window, and ran away? Who would have been motivated to do such a thing, considering this was not a robbery? Story 15. Cold case from 1981 solved. Deborah Lee Miller of Mansfield, OH, was 18 years old at the time of her murder. The suspect was shot and killed by police in November 2024. Cold case investigators looking into the 1981 murder of 18-year-old Deborah Lee Miller in Mansfield, Ohio, declared the case solved. The suspect has been named as 68-year-old James Vaughnist. Vaughnist was killed by police in a shootout in November of 2024 in Canton, Ohio, after Deborah Lee Miller's body was found in her apartment. Among those questioned was her upstairs neighbor Vaughnist, who was 25 years old at the time. He claimed to have had consensual sex with her in her apartment, but denied having anything to do with her murder. The case went cold from there. In 2021, the case was looked into again, this time using DNA experts to assist. When the police reached back out to Vaughnist at his home in Canton, he refused to answer questions, sold his home, and moved away. Vaughnist could not stay out of trouble, however, and was arrested in West Virginia for firearms violations. When finally being served a warrant for those charges in a Canton hotel, he decided the best thing to do would be to have a shootout with the authorities. One officer was shot. James Vaughnist was shot-killed by police. Police have closed the case, claiming the DNA evidence against Vaughnist is solid. Why his involvement was so easily dismissed back in 1981 is so frustrating. So many of these murders of young women who are killed while alone in their home just turn out to be done by young single men living nearby. I hope that any time a woman is found murdered in their home, all of the young men living nearby are looked into, and their stories never taken at face value. Story 16. Central African Republic, car, hit by anonymous airstrike. November 26, 2022. Hello and a very warm welcome to my first, and hopefully not last, official case write-up here on Reddit. I hope you'll enjoy the topics I research and the unsolved cases I write about. Today I'll be covering a military mystery in a part of the world we don't hear or talk much about. That place is the Central African Republic, CAR. The CAR shares its borders with Cameroon to the west, Chad to the north, and South Sudan further towards the northeast. The country has been locked into an ongoing civil war, with many different armed factions involved in battles all across the land. There have been a total of 6 coups in its history, and stability in the region seems to have gotten worse since 2013, the year that saw former President François Bozizé ousted by Seleka, a mostly Muslim militia. Government officials have never been able to stop or end the sectarian violence plaguing the nation. 2018 saw the introduction of the Russian paramilitary organization, Wagner Group, further complicating security matters and concerns in the country. Their presence and unwavering support of current President Faustin-Archange Touadéra saw France begin to pull troops out of there. It's thought the French withdrawal from the CAR had some influence on the same result in Mali. Wagner's primary function in the CAR is to patrol the capital Bangui and protect the country's gold and diamond mining resources. They have repelled attacks from outside factions and helped to keep current President Touadéra in power. They also are responsible for training African soldiers and providing assistance to the Central African Armed Forces, FACA. Besides their peacekeeping mission, the Wagner mercenaries have also been accused of committing human rights violations. A number of attacks across the CAR have reportedly been carried out by Wagner and the FACA. Together, these forces working in tandem have caused a lot of death and despair to the CAR. They have reportedly opened fire on the village people without any rhyme or reason. UN peacekeepers and local journalists are almost always denied entry to the massacres. In 2020, President Touadéra called on Moscow to send more mercenaries to the war-torn country after a community collective of rebels began marching towards Bangui, the capital city. Moscow obviously fulfilled this request and flew an additional contingent of mercenaries to the CAR. Towards the end of 2020, a violent offensive was launched against the government by multiple factions loosely teaming up to achieve a common goal together. Officials were caught off guard, and many of the towns and villages were seized by the collective front. FACA, with the full support of Wagner Group, had to respond with a strong counteroffensive and managed to push the armed rebels out of the towns and villages for the first time in more than a decade. Government officials have all but silenced the critics, independent media, and the opposition in recent years, with many journalists having been arrested, harassed, and dragged through judicial inquiries by pro-government supporters. These efforts have proven to be fruitless, however, as the UN has successfully been able to document most of the atrocities and war crimes committed in the CAR. In total, over 900 civilians have been slaughtered by Wagner mercenaries since they've been stationed there. The innocent civilians are chosen at random or based on their ethnicity or religious beliefs. Fast forward to the weekend of November 26, 2022, when the country was rocked by an airstrike from forces unknown. The strike was precision-based and targeted a military base housing FACA and Wagner Group. Kotanaf base in the Bossangoa region was heavily damaged, and so too were the homes and infrastructure surrounding it. No casualties have ever been reported, and Bangui was quick to point the finger at neighboring nations being responsible for the strike. Wagner Group opted to point their guns in the air and shoot up into the sky for nearly an hour following the strike. Some eyewitness accounts have the explosions going off between 5 to 6 a.m., while others say it happened between 2 to 3 a.m. No definitive timeline has ever been established, and no military power or leadership has ever taken credit for the strike. What we know is this: a low-flying fighter jet entered CAR airspace completely undetected in those early morning hours, and then made it rain bombs over Bossangoa. A government spokesman released a statement not long after the event, saying the aircraft flew north before disappearing from their radar forever.